Well, hello there. I'm wearing my extra ugly shirt again. There we go. Flip the microphone around. There's some words in ancient Greek and in Pali that are untranslatable. They're not really words or even ideas, as most words are. And this video is not about that. They're principles that you can't lay your finger on. If you know what the word means, you know what it means. There's like a dozen different ways you could translate it, and people don't get it. There are different ideations, and this is, of course, about logos, but that's not what this video is about. People have very frequently asked me, they said, you know, what are some of the mysteries of the universe that you're curious about? And honestly, that always stumps me. There's a few points of minutia that I've not directed my mind at because they're, you know, little potholes on the road of understanding, and they're not incredibly important, but some of them are important. And I figured one of them out last week, but I've never really, you know, intensified my gaze, and by gaze I mean thought in unraveling the nature of, towards same. And you know, 85% of the picture was there, but the remaining 15% I just not really directed it at. And that's regarding two forms of sentience. Every ancient metaphysics, both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian, said that there's two selves, which of course there are, and there are two forms of sentience, which of course there is. And this is the same idea of magnetic polarity, for example. I got a little magnet tattooed right there on the inside of my right wrist. It's quite appropriate for the first human being to figure out what magnetism truly is, to have a tattoo of a magnet on them. But a magnet doesn't actually have poles either. You know, I've said this a million times. You could cut a magnet in half, and each new half will, of course, be a whole magnet. There's an incommensurable principle there. There's two selves. There's the immanent self, the meat suit self, which has its own form of sentience, and that sentience in English is called consciousness. But there's also, too, a transcendent sentience, which has nothing to do with the meat suit, obviously, because the meat suit's been laid down permanently. And it has nothing to do with water, because water is that third thing which is necessary to combine two things, that being matter and spirit. And I've said endlessly that, of course, that's the antenna that makes life possible. And that hasn't changed. Nothing has changed. And all of this has to be kept really simple, because that's how Mother Nature works. She's a hairy armpit chick with muddy feet, and she doesn't have a calculator. And everything has to lock into everything else, like a bunch of puzzle pieces that paint a singular picture. You have 100 puzzle pieces. They all have to interlock, and it all has to paint a super, super simple picture. Everything has to tie in everything else, which of course it does. Getting the two types of sentience and figuring out what the basis, or the logos, is of the other sentience, that disembodied sentience, which doesn't have a meat suit, and of course there's no water there, has to be figured out. But the answer is super simple. It's the same sort of simplicity behind how I was able to figure out the basis of matter. The reconciliation of light and matter is simple. All matter is compounded hydrogen, and hydrogen is super high capacitance light. Very simple. This also, too, explains galactic jets and astrophysical jets, and it just makes everything super, super simple. Well, water is the logos. We're going to define logos here in a minute. And, of course, people think logos means word, and that's how it's translated in the King James Version of the Bible. So it's, at first, I can't remember the exact passage. I know what it is, but, you know, there was the Word, and then the Word was with God, and the Word was good. It doesn't mean word, actually, even though it's translated that way. This is the problem of a handful of Greek words and Pali words, too, that there's no translation for, like logos, the iristos dias, ananke tolma. It's untranslatable. I know exactly what they mean. People say, what's the translation? It's like, well, I have to give you a 30-minute spiel for you to understand it. If you know what it means, you know what it means. Anyway, of course, sentience is twofold. One is transcendent, i.e. of the soul, and one of them is immanent. This, of course, is regarding existential consciousness. Water, of course, is required for life and consciousness. Where's my little chalkboard here? And, of course, I've talked about this endlessly in live chat stream, and it's very, very simple. There's the Greek representation of everything, and they called it, and I have it tattooed right here on my upper knuckles, they called it yugata, which doesn't mean health, it means ratio or proportionality of the pentagram, which is composed of three specific triangles, the 1-1-5 triangle, right here, 1, 1, and phi, and then we have a holographic representation of everything right here represented, which then becomes 1-1-5. I kind of drew that incorrectly, but this is also, too, the logos of consciousness. You have the oxygen here, hydrogen here, and this, of course, is this neat little thing called H2O, or water. Isn't that neat? I'm sure that's totally coincidental that the logos of life is this neat little incommensurable molecule that makes life possible, because without this there is no life. But without water there's a different form of sentience. Sentience is twofold, just as there are two cells, transcendent and immanent. And of course I've talked endlessly that if you can understand that, I've talked about it before, I've written articles on my Substack, go check out my Substack below, it's free to read, that if you understand the two lights and the two darknesses, then you could understand about 80% of metaphysics. Just as a magnet doesn't have two poles. I mean, these are all unified. So what's the unification of sentience? If we remove out water and we remove out the constituents of the meat suit, how do we have sentience in the transcendent? This would be analogous to saying the radio signal is itself sentient. You know, smashing the radio, you know, we still have a signal. In this case, we're talking about a sentient signal. This is kind of a near-perfect analogy. The antenna, of course, is the logos of the broadcast. The broadcast that actually comes out of the speaker is not the signal. The broadcast that comes out of the speaker is the interpretation of the signal through the logos of this antenna, and also to the analog to digital converters and the processors. There's a little fly in here. And this union, of course, makes sentience possible. This antenna, of course, is the ratio, or the sympathetic resonance, and that's all this is a little curly-Q piece of wire inside this that's cut at a specific length that makes it a logos, or a resonance, a sympathetic resonance, or a sympathetic manifestation. It's like conjuring something to the specific frequencies that are meant to be tuned. In this case, it's a 2 meter or 440. True sympathy, of course, conjures something, just like holistic things in life, like good food and good mineral water, conjures good health, obviously. Things that are sympathetic to something that you want to conjure. You know, you don't conjure good health by eating Crisco and Twinkies. You know, you conjure it by, you know, eating meat and mushrooms and you know, good clean mineral water, you know, stuff like that. You know, that's of course the problem with health today. Obviously, it's a problem with everything actually in the cosmos. To account for something, of course, is to make something appear, arise. The logos, quite frequently in the works of Plato and Aristotle, will be translated not as word or ratio, but as an account. But of course, to account for something means to make something arise so that you can count it. To conjure something, to make something appear. So this antenna, of course, is the logos of the broadcast. This makes, not that the radio is alive or the broadcast alive, this is the logos that makes the broadcast possible. Then, of course, and I've talked about that before, but then we have to tie this in perfectly like a puzzle piece in talking about a different type of sentience that is not the sentience of life and of consciousness that is being recorded by this camera right now, which is a combination of water, the meat suit, and the signal. Yeah? That interlocutor, of course, between the signal or the soul and the heap of matter, i.e. the meat suit, is of course water. So what is that? I don't know if you know what dielectric breakdown is, but it's required for a disembodied sentience. Dielectric breakdown, you could actually find a scientific explanation of what dielectric breakdown is, but it's basically a non-perfect capacitor. They'll call it an insulator, but an insulator is actually a capacitor, and this gets into field theory, and they have to take you deep down the rabbit hole of something that's considered to be an insulator is actually a capacitor. But I've talked about that endlessly for years. But look into dielectric breakdown. I think you know what dendritic is. You've actually seen the branching pattern of lightning in the sky, and there's countless millions of pictures of this dendritic breakdown. And this, of course, is the desaturation of the charge that's in the sky, and it's actually a discharge into counter space. But this dielectric breakdown, or this dendritic logos, and this dendritic logos of non-embodied sentience. This would be like dream state sentience, where you're walking around and seeing things. You know your eyes are closed and it's totally dark, and when you're sleeping there in bed, you mean you're walking around and seeing things just as you would in the real world. Everybody's experienced that. I mean, we've even seen dogs or cats, they're sitting there running and their little paws are moving while their eyes are closed. They're seeing and running in the field wherever a dog or cat does in a dream state. And of course everybody's done that. This dendritic logos, and that's, of course, embodied sentience. The being, of course, is still alive. But the same thing occurs in a disembodied sentience, no different. Different, but ultimately no different than a dream state. Thought itself is dendritic. Yeah? And when I say dendritic, I'm talking about like when you see the branching of trees, that pattern is dendritic. When people actually get hit by lightning, it stays on their back or their chest. That pattern is dendritic. It's called Lichtenberg pattern, or Liechtenstein pattern. Is it? Yeah, Lichtenberg. I said Liechtenstein. I meant to say Lichtenberg. Lichtenberg patterns. I'll edit that out of this video. That's dendritic. The fractal brain, which is nearly analogous to a piece of cauliflower, is also too dendritic. This fern-like electrical, it's not electrical, it's electrostatic or dielectric. Can appear and quickly, of course, fade from, the backs or chests or legs of people that have been struck by lightning. This discharge logos follows a logos that is necessitated by the permeability and permittivity of the very essence of that which the soul is. Now, if you want to say ether, 0-point energy, I don't care what people use. There's a dozen different names for it. It doesn't make any difference. But it has to follow that pattern. And that pattern, and this is the same thing we call C, which unfortunately is foolishly translated as the speed of light. That's the ratio between elasticity and density. In other words, it can't occur, the disturbance can't occur at a rate any faster than that, because that's the speed limit of cosmic law. That's the logos of cosmic law. Well, that speed limit of discharge follows a pattern, and that pattern is dendritic. And that dendritic logos follows phi. I'm trying to keep it really simple. I can make it a lot more complicated, but people would get upset and they say, well, you really complicated it now. And I'm keeping it very simple. But it follows this phi dendritic discharge that must necessitatively, there's that word again, anankes, doesn't really mean necessity. It means it can't exist any other way. See, that's another untranslatable word like logos, the term ananke. I got a 340-page book that tries to translate that one word only, and it never accomplishes it. If you want to send me a comment on the name of that book, I'll give you the name of the book. It's, this big, heavy scholastic book. It just tries to translate one word, ananke, but it doesn't accomplish it. It means it can't exist any other way. That's the way it must occur. And it follows a cosmic law. In this case, that law is a logos. Life sentience follows a logos, and the transcendent sentience, which doesn't have water or a meat suit, but it still follows a logos. It has to. It can't occur any other way. That discharge follows a dendritic logos. How it must appear, and the ratio or law or logos by which it must appear and occur. And this gives rise to a disembodied sentience. It's very, very, very simple. The only difficulty occurs in explaining it, and I explain it easily, but it'd be so difficult that people are like, man, you're confusing me with a bunch of heavy words. I'm keeping it very simple. You know, spine and the nerves in the human body are dendritic. You can actually see this tree or fern-like pattern. Well, the transcendent soul, or the nous, follows a logos. But that logo, what does that mean? You know, okay, follows, but how is that pattern sentient? Well, it must follow that pattern. The dendritic logos of the transcendent pattern which must be followed that gives rise to this disembodied sentience can't exist any other way, and it's perfect in itself, and it follows a phi logos. Phi is what people call the golden ratio, of course. But when you say golden ratio, nobody knows what you're talking about. It's like, what does the golden ratio mean? Well, I don't know. It means beautiful. And it's like, well, that's descriptively accurate, but you haven't actually explained what the golden ratio is. The logos of living and disembodied sentient beings both require this fractal self-similarity of phi incommensurability. The incommensurability is no more fancy than saying when you split a magnet in half, each new half isn't like a north pole over here and a south pole over here. Each new half is its own magnet, and you do it endlessly. And it's always the same thing. You know, there's no midpoint with, over here is the north pole and over here is the south pole. No, sure it is. Everybody knows that's what a magnet is. Like, well, if you split it, you haven't actually split polarity. This means there's no actual polarity in a magnet if you split it down the middle and you don't have a north over here and a south over here, but you have two wholly new magnets, just half the size that they used to be. Then this means that the assumed polarity of the magnet is incommensurable. Almost untranslatable, but it would take a whole other video to begin to broach incommensurability. It's no different than saying holographic self-similarity. If you take a hologram, a holographic positive, you cut out the corner where none of the image is. The image is up here. So I'm going to cut out the corner. The entire image is still present in this, little piece from, any corner. It's like, well, the image is here. Like, what about down here? Well, there's nothing there. Like, oh, yeah? You can cut it out and project a laser through it, and the whole image is still present in the little piece. Just like the magnet, and just like sentience, explaining living sentience is not that difficult, but explaining the logos or law of disembodied sentience is a little bit more difficult, but not really. I'm trying to keep it simple. This logos, of course, is the euristos dias. This is also, too, goes by the term the demiurge. Logos like you find in the Bible, which is a complete and total messed up translation, and it's not really a translation. The Word was with God, and it was perfect. No, it doesn't. It's not what the translation says. It says the ratio or relationship. The law, of course, is the logos, but not the earthly law of, created by men, but rather a cosmic law or ratio. This is no different than saying natural order. In Republic 534b of Plato, it describes the master who can give an accounting of the logos of true essence, or oasia, or true being. But it doesn't mean account. It's translated from Plato's works as account. It can give you an account of true being. What it means is the law. The nature by which something is self-ruled in the cosmic law of natural order. That's what this word in that context of logos means. Logos, of course, is cosmic sympathy. Well, cosmic sympathy is no different than talking about sympathetic resonance. This is the ratio, like Nikola Tesla's earthquake machine. It's tunable. You attach it to something, you find the right frequency or sympathetic resonance, and this little oscillator just moves a weight back and forth. You find the frequency, and then the whole building will start to resonate. That's sympathetic resonance. So if you find the right frequency and you attach Nikola Tesla's earthquake machine, then you actually have a logos where one thing is attuned to something else. It's like, this works. Now they're meshed. just as this piece of wire that is the antenna is cut such that it is sympathetic to the frequency desired to be tuned.
Sunny sky.
That's the logos. That frequency of Tesla's earthquake machine is the logos of sympathetic resonance between his machine, his earthquake machine, and the building, for example. They'll both, there's a demonstration, they attach to this little machine about that big. It's got like a 2-pound weight that oscillates. You could tune the oscillation frequency with a little tuner, and then the whole bridge will start to vibrate because you found the logos of the bridge, which is its sympathetic resonance. Well, this transcendent sympathetic resonance that's above water and above the meat suit has a frequency, not literally a frequency, but it has a dendritic manifestation or conjuring of itself that follows phi, that gives rise to, it doesn't give rise to, it's always there, so I shouldn't say give rise to, let's manifest transcendent sentience. You know, this, of course, is the basis of both heaven and hell, literally and figuratively, but of sentience itself. I mean, this is how you're able to see in a dream state when you're sleeping in a dark room and your eyes are completely shut. You're walking around and doing things and interacting with people. You have the same type of sentience in a disembodied state as well. Water, of course, is the logos of life, or the law, or the logos, which establishes life. This, of course, is the ratio or sympathy by which it manifests. Nous follows that logos or law of natural order, as it necessitatively must. Once again, all the puzzle pieces fit perfectly, and they're all perfectly simple, and they all paint the same picture. They must paint the same picture. There's no other way around that. Mother Nature literally is that simple hippie chick. You can't say, there's nothing in nature, this here and that over there. There ain't no such thing in nature. Like saying in a magnet, well, you got the North Pole over here, you got the South Pole over there, and magnet's got 2 poles. Like, no, it doesn't. Sure it does. Everybody knows that. I thought you were the guy that knew everything about magnets. I was like, no, you don't understand. Magnet doesn't have polarity. There's no this here and that there. They are unified. Specifically, polarities of 3-dimensional force vector. Yeah, centrifugal divergence, which of course necessitatively must manifest due to loss of energy or inertia because magnetism is a dielectric field, but I've explained that endlessly in other places. The golden ratio is the logos of beauty, but this logos also, too, is the attribute of the one. This is called a golden caliper. I think they're like $5 or $6 on Amazon. Somebody bought me one. Let me put it over here. This is always 1, and this is always phi. So this would be 1.618 relative to this being 1. So it doesn't matter where I put it. This is always 1, and this is always phi. And take it all the way out. This is still 1, and this is still phi. This is a harmonic ratio between beauty and also, you know, they're joined right down here at a single axle point. This, of course, would be the 1. But the ratio at which they're joined, everything over here, of course, is the beautiful. But, I mean, if we just look at this itself, it's not beauty by itself, but in relationship to the one. And this whole thing is a singular system. In relationship to this, and it's no different than talking about the material of this shell, which we all recognize this as the golden ratio, the ratio at which it occurs and curves out relative to the matter that it's composed of, we find to be beautiful. Therefore, it follows a logos of beauty. But the same is true of sentience, whether it be embodied or disembodied sentience. Necessitatively, it also, too, must be. This is the same is true of life and of health. This is what is found on ancient coins in ancient Greece. In a coin of Greek, tattooed on my knuckles here, for example, around the 5 points of the pentagram of the Pythagoreans, it says yugita. They mistranslate it as health, but that's not what it means. It means harmony or cosmic law. Yeah? When you actually have, and analogously or crudely, that is true, health. You know, the same is true of sanity. The same is true of transcendence. Everything is about energy, frequency, and vibration, as Nikola Tesla said, of course. That logos is not necessarily meant, as translated this way, as counting or telling or saying or speaking, but rather to summon something. You know, this antenna summons the signal. You know, smash this radio, the signal is still everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I mean, that's undeniable. You know, this kind of looks like a magic wand, doesn't it? Well, that's what the logos is in the case of the radio analogy, to make things really simple in your brain. It summons something. You'll say, well, logos means speech. Well, it's giving an account. No, it's about cosmic law. Not man's law, but cosmic law, because you're saying or speaking something, and when you speak something, you're summoning something. Like I could say a horrible word, and what it would do, it would summon something horrible in the listener's ears. I say something horrible, it would summon up, you know, disgust or anger. You know, I'm summoning something. I'm conjuring something forth. And that logos is the law by which it doesn't mean word. The word was with God. It's like, no, the word is logos. Logos doesn't really mean word. Well, that's what it says here in my Bible translation. Yes, it does, but that's not what the word logos means. It kind of does in a really crude fashion, but not actually. You don't know what logos means, so. I say it, thence it is summoned forth. You know, it has been spoken, therefore I have conjured it in the minds of listeners. I say, well, then it's speech. Like, that's not what it means. The logos summons forth something. Well, there is a logos to sentience transcendent, and there is a logos to sentience embodied, which is conventionally called consciousness. But consciousness requires water. But that water molecule itself is the logos for existential life to occur. Without it, there is no life, right? Well, there's the same dendritic logos of the disembodied. Let me see if I draw a dendritic pattern here. And then it branches out like this, and this, and this, and this, and this. You see that? You know, it's kind of crude, but you see the dendritic or fern-like lightning pattern. You have the same logos of the disembodied soul that is also, too, the basis for sentience, just not embodied sentience. I hope I made that simple. I hope you like this video. Any donation is always warmly welcome. Check me out in the live stream. Check out my free articles below in Substack. All my information and email contact too is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Lux e Veritas.